Hi there everyone, welcome back to my channel, thank you very much for joining me, and welcome to another episode of Chaos Roundup for Dissidia Final Fantasy Opera Omnia. Now I've only got two events to show off this Chaos event for this week, and they are Lulu's Lost Chapter and Kam'lanaut's event. And I didn't use any synergy for either of these events, which is quite interesting. So if that's something you want to watch while I give some commentary, some feedback on the event itself, and some ideas for alternative characters you could use or team setups, then stay tuned and keep on watching. Before we go into the events themselves, I'm very pleased to say that my Patreon is back up and running, and I've been going to massive lengths to try and think of things that I can do to give back to the community that has welcomed me with open arms once again, and I'm really very appreciative of it, so I really wanted to try and do something really cool. So feel free to have a look in the link in the description box below towards my Patreon channel, and if you want to support the channel further or even get yourself some little title cards, as you can see, just like the ones down below that are going to be put at the end of each of my videos, then, you know, consider perhaps signing up to Patreon. It's very much appreciated. And as the Patreon says, at the during each of my videos, I'm going to be giving a shout out to a patron of the day every time I do a video, and a patron of the day this time around is going to be Cyprus. Now, thank you ever so much for being so supportive, and you've supported the channel for quite a long time as well, so I just wanted to make sure that your support is very much appreciated. And also don't forget to check out all of my other social media links in the description box below, so it's Twitter, Twitch. I actually have a plan for Twitch that I'm really excited about. It's not Dissidia, but it's something I'm really excited about, so stay tuned and look out for stuff from that. And obviously don't forget to check out DissidiaDB.com and all of the other content creators for Dissidia, because they appreciate your likes and your subscribes and all that good stuff just as much as I do. So as you can see on my left here, we have Lulu's Lost Chapter. Now I decided with this particular event to take Rosa, Zack and Yuri. Now we all know how much I've been liking Yuri recently, and actually this team in general is a really cool and good fun one to use, because there's just so much synergy between all three characters. They all fulfill a different role each, and yet they all support each other in small ways. Rosa's buff is just amazing in general, and it boosts max bravery, initial bravery and attack, and the fact that it boosts initial bravery makes Zack's shield stronger. It also makes the regens from Yuri stronger. It's, you know, it just works really well. All three of them can heal, which is really nice, because Rosa can heal off of Luminous Arrow, Zack heals off of Apocalypse, Yuri has Clavastion's Swords buff or Chalinka come in and do more healing. So honestly, your health shouldn't really be an issue when it comes to using these three in a party. And then because you've got Zack using Apocalypse and making sure that everything's locked onto him, you have your damage dealer in Yuri, because his damage is really quite strong, particularly against multiple enemies, and even against single targets it's useful. He has the whole Imperil enchant or self-enchant thing going on, which is really nice. You just have a lot of different synergies. You've got a good overflow limit buff as well between Rosa and Yuri, and Zack obviously buffs his own as well. Everything just gels together very nicely with these three particular party members, and that's why I chose to take them, because I don't have Lulu. I do have Jekt, but I didn't really want to spend the ingots on him without having Lulu, and even if I had Lulu I wouldn't have the ingots to spend on her either. I'm actually looking at doing a little kind of life hacks video when it comes to Dissidia, so that I can give you guys a couple of tips and tricks on sort of like my mentality when it comes to pulling now, and sort of things that you might not know, or certain like you know, less sort of veteran players might not know, things like that. But with this event itself, it wasn't a particularly difficult event, in all honesty. It was more sort of long and arduous than anything, because everything in this fight is just a massive HP sponge. There's a couple of moments where I feel like I do make mistakes, because I do in many of my runs. I'm by no means a perfect player, but I'm kind of happy about that, because when I show you guys these runs, it goes to show that you don't have to be 100% perfect to clear this stuff. So I take an Aranea friend and I take Shiva. Shiva because I want the attack buff. Because well, attack and speed is useful. You know, you don't run out of things too quickly with these three. They're kind of quite evenly spread in terms of turn count, but it still makes me faster than the opponent, which I find quite valuable in this particular case against a single target enemy at the very least. And then Aranea, you know, she's still silly and she's still really powerful. So there's honestly very little reason why you couldn't take your own Aranea. She's extremely powerful. She'll still do very well for this event. The end boss only really resists magic, so you know, you don't have to worry too much about sort of who you take, unless, you know, the reason that you take Lulu is because her fire in peril will override the magic resistance, so you don't have to worry too much about it. But I chose to take pretty much all physical based characters except, well, Rosa, but Rosa's magic isn't really why I'm taking her. I want her for her aura, I want her for a prayer, I want to have the brave overflow. And her EX and her, you know, EX is ranged, her HP plus is ranged, so she does work a little bit different. She's not completely reliant on magic. The two dragons at the beginning, well, I mean, we've all seen them many times at this point. They're very similar to what they've always been. They don't really pose too much of a threat, but they take a little while to take out. The actual sort of boss itself at the end, sort of in the third wave, the only thing you really have to worry about is the delay mechanics it employs, and Zack helps a lot with this, or any tank will help a lot with this, particularly Zack, I think, because as long as the enemy is locked onto him, then he's not delaying the two characters that can save one another, and Zack's doing his job. Like, if Zack's taking all the hits and he's getting delayed, then it means his buffs are taking longer to wear, so his shield will last longer, and his shield comes into play a lot in this fight. There is one moment nearer the end where I take quite a large chunk of damage, but between Yuri and Rosa and Zack, it all just gets healed back up pretty quickly, so it's not really an issue. The only thing I wish I'd done differently is I probably summoned a little bit too early, or summoned Aranea and my summon a little bit too early. I think perhaps I didn't really foresee quite how much tankier this boss gets at the end of this fight, because, I mean, all bosses in Chaos get tankier as the fight progresses, but this one in particular, it's like the end of it just felt like a slog. It just took forever. So there's that to bear in mind as well. But just the reason I took Yuri, actually, before I forget, is his gravity-based damage. Because the robot will get a lot of, the golem will get a lot of bravery out of nowhere, because it will get multiple turns in a row if it starts sort of like delaying in the right times and things like that, and he just gains bravery. Yuri's really valuable against that, and I used Yuri's crystal power attack a fair amount, but both his crystal power and his Clavashan Sword EX are both gravity damage as well as regular bravery damage. So I just think that Yuri's a great pick for this fight myself, and that's why I took him. In terms of characters you could take to this event that are different from the ones that I've taken, you actually have tons of options. You could go with like a more delay-based team where you use like Aranea or Tifa or Y'shtola. Characters like that will work really well as well, because this boss isn't resistant to delay in any way, and we all know how strong Aranea is, so you can use her if you want to. You've got Warrior of Light, which works really well as an alternative to Zack, because obviously a lot of the golem's attacks will do sort of AoE brave damage, which obviously isn't great for Zack. But if you've got shields up and he does his AoE brave HP attack, which can be actually very dangerous near the end of the fight if you're unprepared for it. Like I said, I nearly get killed by it, but luckily I had a lot of HP and he was broken before he'd done it. Or he'd built up a lot of bravery, but I just had enough health, thank God. He doesn't do any damage. Like, if he's broken and your wall shields are up, his AoE brave HP will do 0, and that's a really nice thing to have access to. You've got all sorts of other characters. Obviously Lulu's going to be really good. If you've got Lulu, then you could bring Jekt along, because the fire in peril means that you're just going to take the thing's health right down. I've seen a lot of people use Setzer, and again, this plays into the whole sort of delay mechanic with red card, and red card actually does a decent amount of damage as well. Freeze Joker is probably really useful as well if you think that he's going to go off, because the golem does have a tendency to do that. Then it can be a real pain. You can use, as I say, Noctis is a good one. You could use Noctis because of his turn manipulation. It's a solo boss fight, so things like delay and turn manipulation and re-break and things like that are always going to work really well. So you've got so many different characters you can use for that. The boss fight is kind of aimed towards Imperil characters, so equally you could use somebody like Onion Knight or Golbez as well. But there's honestly loads of characters you could use. Garland even. I actually quite like Garland, and I have done since his release, but I think that you've got a very wide options, when it comes to the actual team composition. As long as it's a comprehensive team, then it's probably going to work. As long as you can keep yourself alive, so you need healing, so whether that be Rosa or Y'shtola, or even Aiko, because Aiko does actually provide Imperil as well. She's not quite as strong as Y'shtola or Rosa, but she does get the job done. You'll want a tank, whether that be Wall or Zack. Barsh might even work here because of the HP damage reduction and reducing the damage taken by the AoE. That could be a thing, and you know, the delay means that he's not going to run out of his buffs quite so fast. And then you want a damage dealer. I used Yuri because he kind of fills all the roles that I want him to, but there's loads of characters you could use in this role as well. Aranea, again, perfect. You know, Golbez, really strong kind of just Imperil. Any Imperil character will work here. And then, or even, like I say, somebody like Noctis who has turn manipulation, or Tifa that has delay, things like that. Like if you put Tifa and Y'shtola together, they're a pretty solid duo by themselves. And then the third character can just be in whichever tank you have access to. So now we come up to Kam'lanaut's event and the Chaos event that comes with that. And the team that I chose to take for this was Aranea, Balthier and Y'shtola. Now this event is definitely designed with imperiling and things like that in mind, because what the second wave boss tends to do is put up a buff that says I take no physical damage and you can't gain bravery through abilities. So you know how Yuffie's EX ability works, where your opponents can't gain bravery by any means other than stealing bravery through attacking? It's the same thing, and you can either break them to get rid of it, or you could do what I've done, and I'm sure many others have done, and take Balthier and just steal the buff from them. And that works really well. And honestly, I need more reasons to use Balthier because I pitied him, and we don't go into it. But, you know, equally, because Aranea is so strong as well, I don't need to worry too much about the imperiling or anything like that. So, you know, in Y'shtola, her longevity is amazing. I tried taking Zack, and he is a viable option, but I think you kind of want to have somebody with party enchant, like Lulu. If you have Lulu, then Zack's going to be really good. You could also argue for Onion Knight, but his sort of Blizzard enchant it only comes from his Crystal 65, which is a little bit iffy because you can't rely on it quite so heavily. Although I do think that Onion Knight is still a very viable option. He has AoE damage, his Meteorite does 100% AoE, so you kind of want to bear that in mind. But Balthier was an absolute MVP for me in this fight because he has AoE 100% Brave HP EX attack, and he steals the buffs. So he basically gets things out of the way for then, or like gets the problems out of the way, or that problematic buff out of the way, so that Aranea can then just do what Aranea does, do ridiculous amounts of damage, and just make it so that they don't get turned. Y'shtola, equally, I found was really useful because taking HP damage wasn't so much of a problem with this particular fight, but keeping my sort of party topped up with bravery, knowing that I don't have a tank in this particular composition, I wanted to make sure that I had bravery when I needed it. And my favourite thing about Y'shtola and Rosa, actually, is that Prey and Medica don't, require an HP attack at the end, so she gets to just keep her bravery at the end. Though, please bear in mind, and I'm sure you'll notice it at least once during this fight, it's so easy when you're playing as Balthier to forget when the opponent has the buff that you don't want them to have. And using Medica, and you can't brave gain through abilities, does nothing. So don't do that. It's very bad. But to be fair, Y'shtola really doesn't do an awful lot at all if you can't Brave gain through abilities, but what she does have is Stone, so at worst she can still delay them a turn, which will hopefully get, if you're in that situation, which will hopefully give Balthier time to then steal the buff again, so that you then haven't got to worry about it. And Y'shtola also moves very quickly, like her action delay on all of her stuff is very low, so there were times where I didn't use Pulse of Life because I couldn't, but then I'd use Stone, wait until Balthier would come around because Stone's action delay was so good. You'd end up having Y'shtola have another turn again so that she could Pulse of Life after the buff had been stolen, just in time for the enemies to attack me, not break me, etc. And it worked really quite well. But again, it's Chaos. There's, everything's a sponge. Like, the knights at the beginning are really nothing to write home about in terms of actually being scary. They don't really do a lot. Although, right at the end of that phase, there's nothing worse than thinking that you've got another turn, or you're going to kill them that turn, and because you think, well, I've got to risk it because I don't really want to just waste a skill or lose a turn for no reason, and you leave them on the most minuscule amount of health possible, and then in this particular case, Y'shtola gets broken for it, which has reduced my score, and I just thought, oh, great. Luckily, it didn't factor in too heavily in the end, and it was fine. But I do bear that in mind. Like, when you're not sure, I probably could have used Bravery Rejuvenate or something, just because at least that's going to carry over into the next fight, because the buff lasts for a little longer. In terms of characters you could use that are a little different to what I've used here, basically you want some form of Dispel in your team, because that buff is really irritating no matter which way you look at it. A lot of people put Vanille Sphere, which dispels a buff on break, to Aranea, which is fine. I actually have Vanille EX and I haven't given my Sphere to Aranea because I plan to give it to Vayne instead when he gets his EX+, but that is a perfectly viable option. You've also got Faris. Faris would do really well. I would suggest against using Vanille herself, purely because they have resistance to magic, and the only way to get rid of that is by having an Imperiler, so Lulu or Aiko or Onion Knight or something like that. So Faris and Balthier are the stronger Dispel characters for that reason. But if you have like Lulu, then Vanille might not be so bad. But I think that there's a lot of options you have. Like Golbez would work as well as an Imperiler. Your damage dealer, unless you have Balthier, where you're stealing the buff and you're making sure that they don't get it ever, you're going to want to have some sort of Imperil. You want Dispel or Imperil, ideally both. I used Aranea because she's just very, very strong and I want the turn manipulation, and because she's as strong as she is, you can use the turn manipulation on both enemies, which is quite unusual. Some people have used Rydia if they had her EX as well, because she is synergy. She is a little bit weak nowadays, but she does provide Imperil and Enchant, which is useful, so don't think that you can't use that. If you've got a party-wide like sort of Enchant and Imperil, so Lulu for example, then Zack would work very well because his Apocalypse is magic-based, which is a little bit of an issue because the best thing about Zack is that he's a tank that does obscene amounts of damage, usually with Apocalypse or Rush Assault, but Apocalypse getting pretty much neutered by magic resist is a bit of an issue. So if you can give him Onion Knight Enchant or Lulu Enchant before he does it, then it means that you're going to get the damage that you require. In terms of damage dealers, there's quite a few different options that you've got. Yuri could work again, as I said, Onion Knight could work. Shantotto obviously works very well because she's an Imperiler and she does elemental based damage and she imperils everything, so pretty much anybody goes with her. I wrongly, in my sort of banner review of Shantotto, said that she required work to make work. She doesn't really, because her Imperil kind of covers everything. She slots into a lot of team compositions very, very neatly, and she works beautifully for it. If you've got a very sort of consistent enchant, then Emperor and Ultimecia would work really well, but they don't work nearly as well without it. Emperor, I've seen use his traps as a method of getting rid of the buff, because if you break the enemy, the buff gets lost. So once Dreary Cell has gone off, then they get their move, and then all the traps from the Dreary Cell start going off, and then if they break the enemy, then it gets rid of the buff for you, and that's really useful as well. Like I said, I mean, Y'shtola I've used because I think that she's probably the most potent at just being able to sort of be turn efficient, as opposed to Rosa, who, while I appreciate her prayer buff immensely, I felt that Y'shtola was a better choice here. Friend units, you can't really go wrong with Aranea. Like, honestly, if you're using Emperor, then another Emperor is always useful. Aranea and Aranea together, like Aranea and friend Aranea, sorry, you know, once you've summoned, they're just not getting a turn for ages. You know, it's, if at all. There's a lot of things that you can do with that. If you're going to use somebody like Ignis, then be very, very mindful of that horrendous buff. If you've not got a Dispeller or a way of getting rid of that buff, don't use Ignis, because all of his abilities revolve around Brave Gain through abilities, and if that buff's there, none of them do anything. And they're not really that debuff heavy, so the Memory Lane Pastry is not all that useful. So, I mean, like, Ignis is fine for the Papa Bird bowl, but just bear in mind that that buff has to go before you can really do anything with Ignis. There's a lot of compositions that you can work with this. I found this one slightly harder than the Lulu Lost chapter, whereas other people seem to think otherwise. And that's why I used Aranea, because I wanted to make sure I got a clear in good time for you guys to have this video as soon as I could, and so that I could give you suggestions on alternative characters, things like that. But there's lots of options that you can use. I've seen some really crazy teams out there. Like, I've seen people use Zidane, I've seen people use like Setzer, I've seen people use lots and lots of crazy things. But if you want to, you know, just go and experiment with these things, one of the best things to bear in mind is that this Chaos Open came out first thing this morning, or while I was asleep this morning at 2 AM. Because I'm in the UK and the US stuff, it comes out on US time, so when these events come out, I'm usually asleep. But you've also got to remember they've only come out this morning. There's 2 weeks. If you don't get it right the first time, it's okay. You can just try again. It's not the end of the world. So do bear that in mind when you go into any of these Chaos missions or anything that you might be struggling with, is that you've got time. So that's going to be it for this video. I hope that you've enjoyed having the Chaos missions shown to you. I have tried to take feedback on board that say they want commentary throughout the whole video, but to be honest with you, as much as I'd love to be able to do that, I don't also want to just talk about nothing and give information that's not really relevant to what I'm talking about or anything like that. So sound off in the comments below and let me know how you feel about the video, whether you feel it's improved at all, or whether what you'd like to see coming up from these kinds of videos as well. And obviously don't forget to follow me on all my social media, as I said earlier, and do consider my Patreon channel as well if you would like to support the channel further. Thank you very much for joining me, and I will speak to you guys very, very soon. Stay tuned. Bye!